Chapter 1287. There was a wooden house in the center of the valley. It was Hua Xi's residence, but Lu Yi hadn't noticed it before because of the dense corpse clouds in the valley. Many alarmed corpse race members had retreated underground, and Hua Xi was able to easily control their movements with the help of the mushroom's special methods. Following Hua Xi to the wooden house, Lu Yi saw a black coffin placed in the middle of the house at a glance. Clicking his tongue in wonder, he stepped forward and looked at it for a while. "Who did you prepare this for?" Hua Xi didn't explain. She just jumped into the coffin and closed her eyes. Her aura was still, and she was motionless. At first glance, she looked like a sleeping beauty who had been sleeping for countless years. The corner of Lu Ye's eyes twitched. This woman. Her interests were getting stranger and stranger. In the past, she only liked to play with poisonous insects, scorpions, toads, and other small things. Now, not only did she raise corpse race members in this valley, she even pretended to be one. No wonder he didn't notice her aura before. When she lay here, she really didn't have any aura. But then again, in this environment, such a curvy sleeping beauty seemed to be a little seductive. With a push of her hand, Lu Yi also flipped into the coffin and lay down beside Hua Xi. This thing was made very spacious by Hua Xi, and it wasn't crowded for two people to lie down. Hua Xi's body tensed up slightly. The tip of Lu Ye's nose was filled with an intoxicating fragrance. He couldn't understand how she could still smell so good after dancing with corpse race members all day long. Women were really strange creatures. He couldn't help but take a few more breaths. Hua Xi tilted her head and looked at him coldly. "Now you're not talking about corpse qi?" Lu Yi said with a serious face. "Sure, don't talk." He closed his eyes and enjoyed this rare peace. It seemed that ever since he stepped on the path of cultivation, he had been running around. Even if he occasionally returned to the sect, it was rare for him to rest. Over the years, he had been thinking of ways to improve his cultivation. When his cultivation was low, he naively thought that one day he would reach the Divine Sea realm and he would be able to roam freely, but when he really reached this step, he found that the Divine Sea realm was just a starting point. In the future, there would be more and further journeys waiting for him. Lu Yi didn't know when these days would come to an end. Perhaps they would never end. But at this moment, in such a narrow and cramped environment, it gave him a rare feeling of warmth. Of course, this might have something to do with the soft and fragrant woman by his side. If Lu Yi was alone, he would probably have many sentimental feelings. As if sensing Lu Ye's mood, Hua Xi stopped bickering with him and just lay quietly beside him. Gradually, she found that Lu Yi beside her had fallen asleep and couldn't help but laugh. She slowly turned her body sideways and rested her head on her hands. She looked at him quietly without making a sound. Her bright eyes reflected the entire world. Lu Yi slept very deeply. In fact, at his level of cultivation, he no longer needed to rely on sleep to maintain his energy. Even if he was tired, he only needed to meditate and rest for a while. Perhaps it was because his mood had completely calmed down, or perhaps it was because he didn't feel the slightest threat here. No matter what, such an experience was extremely rare for his current cultivation. Lu Yi didn't know how long he slept before he slowly woke up. For a moment he felt refreshed and in a good state. He couldn't help but stretch. Halfway through his stretch, he suddenly realized his current environment and also noticed a pair of bright eyes staring at him. Turning his head and meeting Hua Xi's eyes, Lu Yi blushed. It wasn't because he was embarrassed to be in such an environment with Hua Xi. They had interacted when they were still insignificant. For him, Hua Xi was one of the few people closest to him in the 9 regions. It was just that he came here with the intention of saying goodbye to Hua Xi. Because once he was promoted to the constellation realm, he would leave the 9 regions and set foot in the starry sky. He didn't know when they would meet again, but he didn't expect that he would sleep here before doing his business. It was somewhat inappropriate. He moved his body and imitated Hua Xi's posture. This time, it was Hua Xi's turn to have an unnatural expression. Because the two were so close, they could clearly feel each other's breathing. But it wasn't over yet. Lu Yi didn't seem to notice and even reached out to grab a strand of her hair, twirling it around his fingertips and playing with it. In the silence, Hua Xi spoke first. "Are you ready to leave?" When Lu Yi came here, she was already aware of it, because Lu Ye's cultivation had reached the 9th order divine sea realm. To Lu Yi, the peerless continent was no longer attractive to him, but he still came all the way here to find him. This could only mean one thing. He was going to leave the 9 regions. How could a woman like Hua Si, who cared so much about her purity, not notice it? And when I go back, it's time to advance. What are your plans after advancing? Hua Si asked casually. The starry sky is very big, and the 9 regions is very small. Now that the 9 regions are integrated into the starry sky, sooner or later, cultivators from other realms will discover the 9 regions. There may also be conflicts, so I can only improve myself as much as possible. Only then can I protect my homeland. Moreover, the stage for constellation realm cultivators is not within the realms. Hua Si said, then you have to be careful. I heard that there are many powerful people out there. If you really encounter someone you can't beat, don't try to be brave. Even if you have to kowtow and beg for mercy, you have to protect your own life first. Only by living can other things be possible. If you lose your life, then you have nothing. It was rare for her to be so serious in front of Lu Yi, which made Lu Yi a little uncomfortable, but he still nodded seriously. Don't worry, if I really encounter someone I can't beat or escape, I will definitely kneel down and beg for mercy. What is integrity? Hua Si was helpless. The more Lu Yi said this, the more she knew that if such a situation really happened, Lu Yi would definitely not do anything immoral. Which cultivator didn't have some dignity? This was especially true for a cultivator like Lu Yi. Sensing her worry, Lu Yi smiled and said, but don't worry, the universe is too vast. If you really want to meet those powerful people out there, it won't be too easy. Moreover, every large realm has at most constellation realm cultivators, so even if you really do encounter cultivators from the outside world, they will probably all be constellation realm cultivators. When have I ever been afraid of anyone in the same realm? This was the truth. Ever since he started cultivating, Lu Yi had never lost to anyone in the same realm. Basically, he had always been the one to kill those with higher realms. What followed was a casual chat. They talked about the scene when they first met, about how Lu Yi had specially gone to the scattered roaming society to look for her, and also about the interesting experience of fighting side by side for the first time in the chess sea. It was like a cycle of time, reliving the warmth of the past and placing their hopes for a better future. There was an end to the conversation, and there was also a time for parting. The two of them hadn't spent much time together these past few years, so they naturally didn't have much to talk about. Thus, there was a long silence. It wasn't until a certain moment that Lu Yi suddenly stood up and let out a long breath. It's time to go. Hua Si replied softly, her voice as soft as a mosquito. Then I'll be leaving now. Cultivate well. Lu Yi was about to stand up as he spoke. Suddenly his wrist was grabbed. Lu Yi turned to look at Hua Si and saw her staring at him angrily, her silver teeth biting her red lips. What's wrong? Hua Si was silent for a long time before she said angrily, can't you be a little more responsible? What? Lu Yi looked at her in confusion. Are you a man or not? Hua Si's expression seemed to become even angrier. How could he tolerate this? Lu Yi said angrily, how am I not a man? Hua Si's face was clearly a little red, and she slowly averted her gaze. Lu Yi wanted to argue a little more, but the force on his wrist suddenly increased. His body tilted, and he fell directly onto the ground. The words that were about to come out of his mouth immediately disappeared. Lu Ye's nose was filled with a delicate fragrance, and his mouth was dry. Feeling the softness under his body, Lu Yi said dryly, then, should I do something that a man should do? Hua Si closed her eyes, and with a wave of her hand, the coffin lid on the side flew up, and the narrow space immediately fell into darkness. He was a man who had always been Lu Ye, a man who charged into battle. This was definitely an unforgettable and memorable experience. Before this, Lu Yi had always thought that the feeling of being in the upper realm was the most wonderful in the world, but now he knew that he was wrong. Very wrong. There were things in this world that were more wonderful than being in the upper realm. Thus, 3 days later. One from the pitch-black coffin, A faint and tired voice sounded. You should go. My legs are weak, I can't walk anymore. Then rest for a while before you go. But another 3 days later, the tiredness in the voice was even stronger. Why aren't you leaving yet? My waist hurts, let me rest for a while more. You lied to me. 3 days later, Hua Xi's voice sounded like she was crying. What exactly do you want? Shoo, don't talk. Half a month passed in the blink of an eye. On this day, the dusty coffin was suddenly opened, and the long-awaited light shone in. Lu Yi was in the midst of his ecstasy when he suddenly sensed that something was wrong. He looked up and saw a deathly pale face, a pair of lifeless eyes staring straight at him, and a large colorful mushroom on his head. He turned around and looked around. Several female corpse clan members had gathered around the coffin at some point in time. Each of them stared at Lu Yi with a pair of dead eyes from all angles. It was as if they were going to stare at him until the end of time. Lu Yi felt as if a basin of cold water had been poured over him, and he felt cold from head to toe. He didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He lowered his head and looked at Hua Xi. You're too much. These female corpse clan members were clearly ordered by Hua Xi to come over and watch. She couldn't do anything to this man. She couldn't scold him, nor could she drive him away. She could only use this kind of crooked method to make him retreat. She regretted opening the door to a new world for him. Chapter 1288. In half a month, Hua Xi felt that her entire body was about to fall apart. If this man still didn't leave, she was afraid that she would really die. 3-inch, you're going too far. Lu Yi lowered his head, not knowing whether to laugh or cry. He really didn't expect that Hua Xi would use such a trick. It was simply unethical. It didn't matter if he didn't look, but when he did, Lu Yi was immediately shocked. He saw that Hua Xi's entire body was also green and purple, and a thick corpse aura was surging out of her body. Even her eyeshadow had become much darker. If this appearance was seen by someone who didn't know, they would probably think that she was also a corpse. She closed her eyes and didn't move at all, looking like she was already dead. Obviously, she wanted to use this to achieve the effect of persuading him to leave. She never thought that Lu Yi, whose lust had already subsided, would suddenly become interested in her after seeing her unique appearance. This kind of experience was extremely rare, and he could not cherish it. With a raise of his hand, the lid of the coffin flew up again, blocking the line of sight of the few female corpses. In the dark space, Hua Xi scolded weakly, "Beast." For a day later, Lu Yi was neatly dressed and sitting on a chair. Hua Xi stood behind him, carefully combing his hair. Lu Yi quietly stared at the reflection of the beauty's face in the opposite mirror. There was a strange rosy color in the fair skin, and it was especially fresh, making him somewhat unable to hold himself back. Hua Xi sensed something and gently knocked his head. Only then did Lu Yi become obedient. At this moment, there was no sound, but it was better than having a sound. After combing his hair properly, Hua Xi took a few steps back and looked carefully. When she found that there was nothing messy or missing, she nodded in satisfaction. Lu Yi stood up and turned his head to look at her. It was really time to leave. Even if he was reluctant, the future of a cultivator was ultimately the universe of stars. Hua Xi said with a smile. Lu Yi nodded, took a few steps forward, and pulled her into his arms. He hugged her tightly with great force, as if he wanted to integrate her into his body and take her away. After a moment, Lu Yi let go of her soft body, turned around, and walked out of the wooden house. He soared into the sky and broke through the clouds. Hua Xi's voice sounded in his ears. You don't have to worry about anything outside. If you need to be hit, hit, kill. If you need to be killed, kill. If you die, I will raise the child in your womb alone. Lu Ye's wings wobbled, and he almost fell down. This woman didn't forget to make him look bad even before she left. This tortuous experience was obviously not a whim of Hua Xi, but a premeditated one. She knew that once Lu Yi left 9 regions, his life and death would be difficult to control. The environment of the starry sky was not as peaceful as 9 regions. Outside, he could encounter powerful enemies that were difficult to match at any time. She was worried that Lu Yi would never return. That was why he had tried to persuade him first. However, when he realized that his persuasion was ineffective, he had no choice but to go into battle himself and feed the tiger with his own body. At the very least, he had to have some sort of concern in his heart. That way, he wouldn't act impulsively when something happened outside. That way, he could better protect himself. As for the child in her stomach, Huaxi had joked about it before, so Lu Yi naturally didn't take it seriously. 7. Resisting the urge to turn back and teach her a lesson, Lu Yi continued to fly higher until she was above the clouds. Then, her expression collapsed and she reached out to rub the back of her waist. 2. Although she was already at the divine ocean and her physique was extremely strong, there were still some repercussions after half a month of unrestrained sex. 10. Lu Yi wasn't joking when he told Huaxi that her legs were weak and her waist was sore. He couldn't understand. Huaxi's body was so weak, and she clearly looked like she was about to die every time. Why did she seem to recover faster than him? This was probably the difference between men and women? I'm still not strong enough. I still have to work hard to cultivate. Lu Yi was enlightened. For not long after returning to 9 regions through the array left by Yuexin, a message came from the battlefield imprint. After checking it, he found that it was a message from Master Yu. Lu Yi exchanged a few words with him and agreed on a place to meet. Then he used the Tianji pillar to teleport over. Not long after, the 2 figures appeared in a wing of the Tianji Business Alliance. Master Yu had arrived early. When he saw Lu Yi, he took out the modified mountain pan saber and placed it in front of Lu Yi. Lu Yi picked it up and first measured its weight. Then, she nodded in satisfaction and pulled out the saber to examine it. The small cracks that remained on the saber had disappeared. The appearance of the saber was no different from before. It could be said that it was exactly the same. However, the quality of the saber was undoubtedly much better. After all, Lu Yi had provided some precious materials for this modification. Master Yu was a little puzzled. Although your saber is heavy and hard enough, there are no restrictions in it. Even if you are strong, you might not be able to unleash too much damage with it. This was what she couldn't understand the most. For treasures, the most fundamental thing was the restrictions that were imprinted on it. The power that a treasure could unleash was completely dependent on the quality and quantity of the restrictions. However, when Lu Yi asked her to modify the saber, she didn't ask her to imprint any restrictions on it. In this way, although it was easy for her to modify it and the quality of the finished product was extremely good, if strictly according to the quality of treasures, this saber couldn't even be considered a spiritual weapon. Moreover, the blade itself wasn't sharp enough. What use could such a saber be in battle? It couldn't be used to smash people, could it? If so, it would be better to make it into a stick, which would be more convenient. Lu Yi smiled slightly and activated her spiritual power. Immediately, a layer of faint light shone on the blade of the mountain saber. The originally simple and unadorned saber suddenly revealed a feeling of extreme sharpness. This is... Master Yu was instantly moved. Divine Edge? The enhancement of the sharpness spiritual tattoo couldn't have such an effect. Therefore, she immediately thought of the Divine Edge spiritual tattoo that Lu Yi had deduced before. Only the Divine Edge spiritual tattoo could make her, who was in the Divine Sea realm, feel the sharpness and unstoppable. That's right. Master Yu was shocked. He looked at Lu Yi in disbelief as if he was looking at a monster. When Lu Yi deduced the Divine Edge spiritual tattoo, she observed it from the beginning to the end. It was a spiritual tattoo that could only be constructed with a total of 2,046 foundational elements. In the evaluation of many spiritual tattooists, such a spiritual tattoo was flashy but useless. Because it was too complicated, it couldn't be widely used. At most, it could only exist as a research spiritual tattoo. However, it wasn't until now that Master Yu realized that it wasn't the spiritual tattoo that was flashy but useless. It was the lack of skills of all the other craftsmen. If she hadn't seen it with her own eyes, Master Yu would have found it hard to believe that there was someone in this world who could construct the extremely complicated Divine Edge spiritual tattoo in an instant and enhance his weapon with it. She finally understood why Lu Yi had made those strange requirements when he was modifying the mountain saber. Since he could construct the Divine Edge spiritual tattoo at will, why did he need to brand other spiritual tattoos? The mountain saber itself was indeed not sharp enough. However, with the enhancement of such a spiritual tattoo and Liu Ye's powerful strength, there was nothing in the 9 provinces that he couldn't cut with one strike, not to mention the starry sky. 2 and sure enough, there is always someone better than you. I've learned a lot. Master Yu was sincerely convinced. 2 When Liu Ye deduced the Holy Blade spiritual tattoo, she knew that Liu Ye was much better than her in terms of the attainment of spiritual tattoos. But now, it seemed that her estimation of Liu Ye's attainment in spiritual tattoos was still too low. It's just that I specialize in my field. Liu Yi smiled and put the mountain saber away. How about the remuneration? Master Yu didn't mention this before, and Liu Yi didn't ask further. They had worked together several times, and Master Yu's price was still very fair. Master Yu shook her head. No need. I've already gained a lot from being able to broaden my horizons today. I don't dare to talk about remuneration. Moreover, the spiritual tattoo you left behind in the sacred ground is enough for me to enjoy for a lifetime. Hearing her say this, Liu Yi didn't force her and thanked her. Master Yu changed the topic and smiled mischievously. You seem to be very carefree recently, fellow Taoist? What do you mean? Liu Yi didn't understand. Grandmaster Yu smiled but did not say anything. Instead, he gracefully walked out of the room and left in a carefree manner. 3. Liu Yi was left alone in a daze. The mountain saber's modification was completed in advance, and it was time to advance to the constellation realm. In fact, Liu Yi could feel that the opportunity to advance to the constellation realm was right in front of him. Because of the benefits he received from the reincarnation tree, his body had been subtly nourished for the past half a year. This nourishment didn't affect his strength much, but it seemed to make his physical body glow with stronger vitality and more mysterious power. Now, this nourishment had reached its peak, and the opportunity to advance was right in front of him. 2 He turned and left the room. After half a cup of tea's time, he had returned to the main sect of the Jade Blood sect. He walked out of the Tianji Hall and was about to head to the Jade Bamboo Peak when he bumped into Shui Yuan. Liu Yi stopped and said a few words to her, but Shui Yuan moved closer and kept sniffing at Liu Yi. What's wrong? Liu Yi suddenly felt a little guilty. Shui Yuan retracted her hand and smiled meaningfully. Nothing. Congratulations, junior brother. No matter what, cherish it well. She turned and entered the Tianji Hall. Liu Yi was at a loss, but when he thought about Grandmaster Yu's words, he quickly realized something. He raised his arm and sniffed carefully at the tip of his nose, but he didn't smell anything. He must have been familiar with Hua Xi's smell after being together for a long time, so he couldn't smell anything. However, Grandmaster Yu and his senior sister Shui Yuan could smell it clearly. A cultivator's nose was still very sensitive. Liu Yi was a little embarrassed. He felt like he had been caught red-handed by his second senior sister, but he couldn't explain it in detail. He covered his face and went straight to the Jade Bamboo Peak. A cultivator's nose was still very sensitive. Liu Yi was a little embarrassed. He felt like he had been caught red-handed by his second senior sister, but he couldn't explain it in detail. He covered his face and went straight to the Jade Bamboo Peak. Returning to his bamboo house, he sat down cross-legged and calmed his mind, waiting for the final opportunity to arrive. Silently sensing it, he could still feel the mysterious power surging in his body. Ever since he broke through to the 9th Order Divine Sea Realm, this power had been playing a role until today. Liu Yi didn't know what the essence of this power was, but he knew that it was because of the nourishment of this power that he had the ability to step into the starry sky. Without this power, he couldn't break through the shackles of the Divine Sea Realm. 3. Chapter 1289. Liu Yi didn't know what it was like for other cultivators of the 9 regions to ascend to the constellation realm. After all, he hadn't observed it before, but it was probably different from his own. Cultivators of the 9 regions relied on the spiritual light born in the 9 regions to ascend to the constellation realm, while he obtained the spiritual light born in the Alpha Origin realm. It was said that such spiritual light was more beneficial to the cultivator in the future. As for the difference, he could only slowly feel it in the future. Time slowly passed. Until a certain moment 5 days later, Lu Yi suddenly felt that the mysterious power of the Alpha Origin realm in his body was exhausted. It was also at this moment that the shackles of his Divine Sea realm shattered. His flesh and blood wriggled, and his blood flowed through his meridians, making him seem more energetic. His mind also rose a lot at this moment, and vaguely, a closer connection between him and the 9 regions was born. There was no special phenomenon, nor was there an overly complicated process. The whole process of his ascension was natural and smooth. There was only an invisible aura, with him as the center, spreading out with a bang, constantly fluctuating. This fluctuation didn't weaken at all, and seemed to spread throughout the entire 9 regions. On Ao Mountain, the cultivators of the Jade Blood Sect were the first to sense it, but the cultivation of the Jade Blood Sect disciples wasn't high, so even if they sensed it, they didn't know what was going on. Only Shui Yuan looked in the direction of the Jade Bamboo Peak with relief, knowing that this was the crucial step her junior brother had taken. A moment later, Lu Ye's high mind returned to its original position, but he was still a little dazed. Just like that, he ascended to the constellation realm? Silently sensing the changes in his body, he soon realized that it was different from before. The biggest change was in his physical body. The cultivation of the upper 3 realms was ultimately a leap in the essence, qi, and spirit. As the first checkpoint of the upper 3 realms, the main purpose of constellation realm cultivators was to improve their essence. Essence was the foundation of the body, the origin of life. From the beginning of cultivation, cultivators were related to the Tao of essence. The so-called refining essence into qi was a method of cultivation. When Lu Yi first started cultivating, he used this method to give birth to his own spirit qi. Cultivators would often use this method to aid their cultivation. This was because compared to swallowing spirit pills, this method didn't have too many side effects. Of course, one had to control it well. If one refined too much, it would cause one's energy to be depleted, and the gains would not make up for the losses. Therefore, human essence was not unique to the constellation realm. Instead, it was something that cultivators had from the moment they were born. It was related to every aspect of a cultivator. With sufficient energy, one's qi and blood would flourish. With flourishing qi and blood, one's physique would be strong. It was just that before the constellation realm, cultivators cultivated essence into qi, but after the constellation realm, cultivators had to pay attention to the improvement of their own essence. Compared to before the advancement, Lu Yi could clearly feel that his essence seemed to have undergone a qualitative leap. This leap would not make his physique stronger all of a sudden. In fact, there was not much difference between his physique and before, but it would make his flesh and blood more vigorous. This led to the birth of the most direct result. The cultivator could traverse the starry sky with his physical body without fearing the corrosion of the mysterious energy that was everywhere in the starry sky. Without such vitality, if a cultivator rashly ventured deep into the starry skies, they would only be eroded to death by the starry sky's energy. Of course, this result was only one of the reasons. There were even more benefits. For example, if the physical body was injured, under the same environment and conditions, the constellation realm could recover faster than the spirit sea realm. This was because the flesh and blood were more vigorous, so the recovery was naturally faster. In the past, Lu Yi had asked Little Nine about some things in the upper realm, but his understanding was not comprehensive enough. This was because Little Nine didn't know much about these things. Its spiritual wisdom was born in the later 9 provinces era. At that time, there were no strong cultivators in 9 provinces, so there was no object to observe. What it knew was only some things recorded in the ancient books left behind in 9 provinces. However, these things were common knowledge passed down by word of mouth to the cultivators of the previous 9 provinces era, who would fall for the written records. Therefore, even these ancient books left behind were not many in number, and most of them were broken. According to Little Nine, when one cultivated to the end of the constellation realm, they could regrow their limbs. In the past, Lu Yi only felt that this matter was too mysterious and didn't take it seriously. However, now that he had advanced to the constellation realm, after careful observation, he realized that this matter could really happen. Right now, he was unable to regrow his limbs, and he couldn't even regrow his flesh and blood. However, if he continued to cultivate and let his flesh and blood become more vigorous, he could regrow his flesh and blood. At that time, even if he was injured, he could quickly recover. The next level above regrowing limbs was regrowing from a drop of blood. However, that was not something that could be done by the constellation realm, not even the sunshine realm. However, in the inheritance of the blood race that Lu Yi obtained, there was a record that when one cultivated the blood race's secret arts to the highest level, they could regrow from a drop of blood. He didn't know if it was true or not. The path of cultivation was long. Before reaching that level, one would not be able to truly understand the wonders of that level. However, Lu Yi discovered a wonderful thing. The more energy a cultivator had, the higher the position they could occupy after advancing to the constellation realm. From this point, body cultivators undoubtedly had an advantage. However, in the end, it was only one. Those weak and delicate magic cultivators could make up for this difference through cultivation, so it wasn't a big deal. Lu Ye's energy was undoubtedly extremely abundant. Not to mention that his physique was originally comparable to a body cultivator of the same level. He also cultivated the blood race's secret arts. Just this point alone was not something that ordinary cultivators could compare to. Therefore, after advancing to the constellation realm, he occupied a much higher position than ordinary cultivators. The most direct manifestation was that under inner vision, he could faintly see bits of starlight in his flesh and blood. Those starlight were unique to the constellation realm. It was the embodiment of one's essence, and also the origin of the name constellation realm. Every bit of starlight contained extremely powerful energy that surpassed the level of the divine ocean realm. Lu Yi understood and roughly understood what cultivation in the constellation realm was all about. No matter what method was used to increase the accumulation of starlight in one's body, when this mysterious energy manifested as starlight accumulated to a certain extent, it would enter the next level. This was only his speculation based on his current situation. He couldn't be sure whether it was true or not. Therefore, he called out softly, "Little Nine." A little light gathered beside him and quickly turned into the appearance of a rabbit. It looked very cute, but when it opened its mouth, it ruined the fun of playing with it. What? What's the constellation realm cultivation? Is it also divided into first order, second order, and then ninth order? Lu Yi didn't understand this before. Firstly, it wasn't the right time. Secondly, he wasn't sure if Little Nine knew about it. Now that he had advanced to the constellation realm, it was time to find out. Unfortunately, when Yang Qing was here, he didn't ask for advice. Now, he could only place his hopes on Little Nine. The rabbit that Little Nine transformed into scratched its ears and cheeks. Obviously, it was stumped by this question. After a while, it said, "Wait." Its figure flickered and disappeared. When it reappeared, there were a few extremely simple-looking jade slips in its paw. It threw them to Lu Yi and said, "Take a look at them yourself." After saying that, it disappeared in a flash. No one knew where it went. Lu Yi picked up the jade tubes, picked up one at random, and poured his divine sense into it. These jade slips were left behind from the previous 9 provinces era. They were so ancient that it was difficult for Lu Yi to read them because much of the information inside was incomplete and disjointed. Moreover, what was recorded in these jade slips was not the constellation realm's cultivation method or division. What was recorded inside was actually something else, only a brief mention of the upper 3 realms. It took Lu Yi a long time to finish reading the contents of these jade slips. Although his understanding of the constellation realm was not comprehensive, at least he was no longer confused. It was a little different from what he had imagined. The division of the constellation realm was not so complicated. There was no such thing as first order or second order. There were only 3 stages, early, middle, and late. Not only the constellation realm, but also the moon jade realm and sun reflection realm. Such a division was undoubtedly an extremely ancient method, and since it existed, there must be a reason for it. It sounded like the promotion after the constellation realm was easier because there were only 3 minor stages. However, Lu Yi knew that this was definitely an illusion. Although there were only 3 minor stages, the promotion of each minor stage was probably countless times more difficult than the previous one. While pondering, a movement came from the battlefield mark. After checking it, he found that it was a message from Jianghu. He hasn't left yet? Lu Yi was a little surprised. Last time, when he returned from the reincarnation tree, Jianghu, Wuchang, and the others came to find him and asked about his opinion on guarding the 9 provinces. Lu Yi meant that it was a good time for the constellation realm cultivators to cultivate, so there was no need to guard the 9 provinces. Moreover, the 9 provinces had the protection of heaven's secret. Even if a master came, as long as they were not in the sunshine realm, they should not be able to do anything to the 9 provinces. Lu Yi thought that Jianghu and the others had left the 9 provinces to go deep into the starry sky, but he did not expect that Jianghu was still in the 9 provinces. For him to send a message at this time, there was no doubt that he had noticed that Lu Yi had advanced to the constellation realm. "Senior, what's the matter?" Lu Yi asked. "Come to the heaven continent." Jianghu replied and gave a location. It was the spirit mountain where the reincarnation tree's clone was. Lu Yi did not know what Jianghu was doing there, but since it was an invitation from a senior, he naturally had to go. He got up and walked out of the wooden house to the Tianji Hall to teleport. Less than half a day later, Lu Yi arrived at the spirit mountain. Looking around, he was slightly stunned because there was an additional majestic hall here. There was no such hall in the past. When Yang Qing was here, there was only a wooden house. Now, the wooden house was still there, but a hall had been built here at some point. Jianghu's aura was in the hall. Lu Yi walked in curiously. Their eyes met, and Jianghu nodded slightly. As expected, you have advanced to the constellation realm. Chapter 1290. When Lu Yi ascended to the constellation realm, a wondrous aura spread out. It didn't cause a huge commotion, but any cultivator with a decent cultivation could sense it. Jianghu naturally sensed it and immediately realized that someone had ascended to the constellation realm. As for who it was, he asked around and locked onto the location of Ao Mountain, which was why he sent a message to Lu Yi. Now that he saw it, it was indeed Lu Yi who had ascended to the constellation realm. He felt gratified from the bottom of his heart. There were billions of cultivators in the 9 states, but among all the juniors, Jianghu and the other seniors valued Lu Yi the most. This was naturally due to his previous achievements. If there was anyone in the 9 states who had the ability to lead the 9 states to a new level, there was only one person in the constellation realm. Lu Yi of the Jade Blood Sect. Therefore, for the current 9 states, Lu Yi ascending to the constellation realm was very significant. It meant that he could jump out of the small pond that was the 9 states and enter the big stage of the starry sky. As for how he would struggle in the future, it was up to his own ability. "Senior, why did you summon me?" Lu Yi asked. Jianghu always had a straight face. It was not because he was arrogant, but because of his nature. At this moment he showed a rare smile. "Since you have ascended to the constellation realm, when do you plan to leave for the starry sky?" "In the next few days." Lu Yi did not plan to stay in the 9 states any longer. Before ascending, he had been working hard for this goal. Now that he had ascended, it was natural for him to leave and see the wonders of the outside world. If Jianghu did not summon him, he would have stayed in the green bamboo peak for a few days to experience the mysteries of the constellation realm before leaving. There was no need to say goodbye to anyone. He had already said goodbye. When the time came, he only needed to say hello to second senior sister. Jianghu nodded slightly. "Where are you going? Or rather, which direction are you going?" Lu Yi did not know which direction he should go. After leaving the 9 states, it was the direction of a sphere. If he did not have a specific goal, he would just go with the flow. However, Jianghu would not ask such a stupid question. Lu Yi's heart skipped a beat. "I'm not sure yet. Did you tell me? Follow me." Jianghu waved his hand. Lu Yi followed closely behind and entered the side hall. Lu Yi looked around and was immediately surprised because there was a round ball placed in the side hall. It looked like it was made of wood, but it was obviously not so simple because Lu Yi felt some characteristics of a spiritual treasure from it. In other words, this thing was a spiritual treasure, but he didn't know what it was placed here for. He turned to look at Jianghu with an inquiring expression. Jianghu gestured. "Try injecting spirit energy into it." Lu Yi stepped forward, placed his hand on the ball, and poured his spirit energy into it. With a soft buzzing sound, specks of fluorescent light suddenly flew out from the spherical spirit treasure and covered the entire side chamber in an instant. At first glance, it looked like fireflies had suddenly appeared in the side chamber. It also looked like they were suddenly in the middle of the starry sky, and each speck of fluorescent light represented a celestial body. Not only that, but there were also some strangely shaped balls of light. The light in the middle was brighter and flickered slightly, as if it had a life of its own. All the scenes were centered around this light and radiated in all directions. However, it was obvious that many directions were blank, without any fluorescent light embellishment. At the edge of another direction, there was a spot of the brightest light. Lu Yi didn't know what it was at first, but after a little observation he suddenly realized. "Senior, could this be the map of the outer space of the 9 states?" Jianghu nodded. "It is the map of the outer space of the 9 states. We call it the star map." Lu Yi sucked in a breath of cold air. This thing, when did it come out? He had no idea at all. It seemed that during this period of time when he was working hard to cultivate, the pioneers didn't waste any time. They were also doing what they could and couldn't do under the constellation realm. Jianghu voice sounded. "There are now more than 800 constellations in the 9 states. These people are now exploring the starry sky. Some are farther away, some are closer. They will record the size and position of the many celestial bodies in the starry sky, and then send the information to me, and I will draw the star map." This was also the biggest reason why he stayed behind in the 9 states. The cultivators of the 9 states had begun to set foot in the starry sky, but as a newly promoted large realm, the constellation realm cultivators all knew that they should work as a whole, and not on their own. So, even though Lu Yi had given his own suggestion, Jianghu and the others still decided to leave one person behind in the 9 states after weighing the pros and cons. It wasn't to protect the 9 states, but to make things easier for those who came after. Every cultivator who ascended to the constellation realm couldn't be confused before entering the starry sky, right? The exploration experiences of these pioneers were extremely precious, and needed to be passed down so that more people would know. That was why Jianghu, Wuchang, and the others built a great hall here. It was called the 9 States Guard Hall, and the one who stayed behind was naturally the 9 States Guard Hall. The Guard Hall's duty was very simple. It was to provide all kinds of information about the starry sky for the newly promoted constellation realm cultivators, so that they would take fewer detours and explore the starry sky more effectively. This was also the awkwardness and pain of every newly promoted large realm, because there were no predecessors to follow, and everything needed to be explored slowly. Unlike the older large realms and even the top realms, before the constellation realm cultivators left their native realms, they already had complete information about the starry sky, and the star maps in their hands could cover trillions of miles. The cultivators of the 9 states didn't have such convenience, and now every constellation realm cultivator was a pioneer in history. The first thing they needed to do was to perfect the star maps outside the 9 states. How could Lu Yi, who had experienced the Spirit Stream battlefield and the Cloud River battlefield, not know the importance of maps? For a moment, he was filled with awe, and respectfully bowed to Jianghu. "Senior's painstaking efforts will not be in vain, and we will follow suit." Jianghu smiled. "This is the joint decision of all the constellation realm cultivators, and not my work alone." Lu Yi shook his head. But at this time, Senior was the first to stay behind. Senior's contribution to the 9 states is enough for future generations to remember. Just like Lu Yi himself, after ascending to the constellation realm, he also couldn't wait to explore the starry sky, let alone a senior like Jianghu who had been in the divine ocean realm for hundreds of years. But he still suppressed the desire in his heart, and chose to stay behind in the 9 states. This kind of stay behind would not be short, and it was impossible to say that someone would replace him after 1 or 2 months. The journey in the starry sky was very long, and those Constellation Realm cultivators who left would not run back in 1 or 2 months. In the discussion between Jianghu and the others, this matter was not forced. If one day a Constellation Realm cultivator became tired of wandering outside, or if they collected a certain amount of spiritual jades and needed a stable environment to cultivate, they would return to the 9 states to take over Jianghu's duty as a guardian. Only then could Jianghu set off for the starry sky. Of course, if no one came back, Jianghu could also choose to catch a strong man to replace him. In any case, according to the current situation of the 9 states, new constellations would be born one after another in the future. Of course, this was all in the future. Jianghu smiled slightly and did not say anything more on this matter. Since he had decided to stay behind in the 9 states alone, he would not wallow in self-pity. Instead, he would do his part as promised. This star map was the result of his recent work. This is the 9 states. Jianghu pointed at the brighter spot in the center and said, Lu Yi already had a guess about this. Since it was the star map of the 9 states, it was naturally drawn with the 9 states as the center. He then pointed at the brightest spot at the edge and said, This is the sun's star. No one knew how far the sun's star was from the 9 states, because no one could fly there, so it was placed at the edge, symbolizing a very long distance. Look here. Jianghu pointed in another direction. There was also a brighter spot in that direction. We call this star Venus. In the starry sky, it is very difficult to determine one's position. In such a large environment, there is no up, down, left, right, north, east, south, so for cultivators who have just entered the starry sky, it is very easy to get lost. Don't laugh. To tell you the truth, this is the most frequent problem for the first batch of cultivators to enter the starry sky. Fortunately, we did not go too far, so we were able to return safely. However, if we had gone further, we might not have been able to return. In the starry sky, how can we accurately find the position of the 9 states? Jianghu paused for a moment, giving Lu Yi time to think. If not for his previous guidance, Lu Yi might not have thought of anything. After all, he knew nothing about this kind of thing. He had not even traveled alone in the starry sky. But with his previous guidance, Lu Yi vaguely understood, using the sun's star and Venus to locate the 9 states? Jianghu nodded. Exactly. As long as you can identify the position of these 2 stars, it will not be difficult to find the position of the 9 states. Lu Yi imagined the situation in the starry sky and more or less had an idea in his mind. This was the experience of his ancestors. If he was left to explore alone, he might not necessarily be unable to find it, but it would definitely consume a lot of time and energy. If he really got lost in the starry sky, who knows where he would drift to? What is this? Lu Yi pointed to a place on the star map. It was a place where a dense mass of light gathered, and it did not look like a star. I don't know what it is exactly, but the information that was sent back described it like this. I just followed the description and conjured the thing in this position. Lu Yi stared at the mass of light and found that at first glance, this thing looked like the shape of a ferocious beast, but there could not be such a big beast in the starry sky. A light flashed in his mind. Starry sky wonder. What? Jianghu showed a puzzled expression. Chapter 1291. Not only are there various celestial bodies in the starry sky, there are also many strange landscapes, known as the wonders of the starry sky. But these strange landscapes are different from the wonders of the world. The wonders of the starry sky are mostly dangerous. Lu Yi gave a simple explanation. Did that senior Yangqing tell you this? Jianghu asked. Lu Yi had left the 9 states with Yangqing once. If he had to ask where he could get information about the starry sky, it could only be from Yangqing. It was in line with his understanding, because the Constellation Realm cultivator who had sent back information about the wonders of this place had said that the place where the light gathered could not be penetrated by divine sense. He had tried to go deeper, but he only dared to go 10,000 li, because the deeper he went, the more danger he felt. In the end, he had no choice but to withdraw. As for what kind of danger there was inside, no one knew. Lu Yi shook his head, took out several simple jade slips, and handed them over. I can see from these. These jade slips were the ones that little Nine had given him before. The things recorded inside were very messy, including cultivation after the constellation realm and introductions to the wonders of the starry sky. Jianghu took them and immersed himself in reading. He could not help but frown. He had encountered the same problem as Lu Yi before. Because it was too long ago, the records in these jade slips were intermittent, making it very difficult to read. But this was still extremely important information, so Jianghu patiently and carefully examined it. While he was examining the jade slips, Lu Yi was examining the star chart in front of him. The star chart in front of him was undoubtedly very incomplete, because there were many blank areas. These were all positions that the cultivators of the 9 states had not explored. Although the number of constellation realm cultivators in the 9 states was not small, when placed in the vast starry sky, they were still a drop in the ocean. With the current manpower, it would take at least 10 or 20 years to completely explore the outer space around the 9 states. At that time, the 9 states would have a complete star chart. Of course, this completeness was only relative and could only cover a limited distance. But as more and more cultivators of the 9 states continued to travel, this star chart would become more and more complete. After studying it for a while, Lu Yi took out a blank jade slip and copied the star chart in front of him. This was not difficult for him, but it would take some time. Half a day later, he was done here. Jianghu had also finished examining the jade slips, and a thoughtful expression appeared on his face. So the cultivation of the constellation realm has these methods. No wonder when we old fellows cultivated, we always felt that something was wrong. What's wrong? Lu Yi was humbly asking for guidance. He had not cultivated. Jianghu said, "We tried to refine the power in the spiritual jades before, but we found that the refined power only worked on the flesh and blood. It seemed that it was difficult to penetrate deep into the body. It was the same for one person, 2 people, and basically everyone. Because there was no way forward to follow, we thought that the cultivation method was wrong. Now we know that it was not the wrong way, but the necessary process." The essence of the flesh, Lu Yi said. Jianghu nodded. According to the records in this jade slip, the cultivation of the constellation realm is divided into 3 stages: the essence of the flesh, the essence of the organs, and the essence of the marrow. They correspond to the early, middle, and late stages of the constellation realm. The early stages of the constellation realm correspond to the essence of the flesh. The energy refined from the jade slips will naturally only accumulate in the flesh. This was the fundamental reason why the constellation realm cultivators could quickly heal and even regrow their flesh after being injured. The more they cultivated at this stage, the more vitality their flesh would have. At the middle stages of the constellation realm, the energy refined would be used to temper the organs. At the late stages of the constellation realm, it would temper the bones. The cultivation of the constellation realm could be seen as a cultivator's meticulous polishing of the body from the outside to the inside. When it reached perfection, it would be possible to regrow broken limbs. And once they advanced to the constellation realm, it meant that the cultivator no longer had any clear weaknesses in the body. At that time, the strength of every cultivator's body would not be inferior to the most powerful of spiritual treasures. This information was very important. It needed to be spread as soon as possible so that the cultivators of the 9 states who had advanced to the constellation realm would know. This was to prevent them from always feeling that something was wrong when they cultivated. If they discovered some strange cultivation method, they might end up putting the cart before the horse. "I'll take these jade slips," Jianghu said. "Senior, please take them." Lu Yi nodded. He had seen these things before. They were not of much use to him. On the other hand, with Jianghu overseeing this place, if any constellation realm cultivators came here in the future, they could read the contents of the jade slips and understand the various aspects of the constellation realm in advance. Turning to look at the star map, Lu Yi said, "Senior, when you asked me which direction I wanted to go, you wanted me to explore these empty areas, right? There would always be someone to explore the empty areas, but no one would force anyone to do so. Moreover, to Lu Yi if he had to choose, he would also choose these empty areas. After all, unexplored areas meant that there would be more opportunities for him to find spirit jades. There was no point in walking the same path as others. He could only pick up the leftovers that others had left behind. Exactly. Are you willing? Of course I'm willing. Lu Yi casually pointed at an empty area in the starry sky. Then I'll go in that direction. Jianghu was delighted. Very good. However, since it's your first time exploring, I suggest that you don't go too far. In the starry sky, try to use the Sun and Venus to locate the position of the 9 states. Familiarize yourself with this method. After a slight pause, Jianghu continued. Also, after you leave, find a hall of heavenly secrets and connect to the secrets of heaven. Obtain a pillar of heavenly secrets and carry it with you. Lu Yi was surprised. Constellation realm cultivators can obtain a pillar of heavenly secrets? He had never heard of this. Jianghu nodded. It was a revelation from the secrets of heaven when we were building this guardian hall. Every constellation realm cultivator can obtain a pillar of heavenly secrets when they leave the 9 states. This way, even if they are in the starry sky, they can still send messages to the 9 states. However, there is a limit to the distance. According to their feedback, they can contact the 9 states at any time within half a year's journey, but beyond this distance, the connection will be cut off. This half a year's journey naturally referred to the distance that the constellation realm cultivators of the 9 states could cover if they flew through the starry sky for half a year. This kind of distance was already very far. Little 9 did well in this matter. Presumably, it also realized that it was inconvenient for the cultivators of the 9 states to contact the local domain after they left, so it sent down this kind of revelation and bestowed the pillars of heavenly secrets. It was with this method that the constellation realm cultivators who left could send back news of their exploration in time, and then allowed Jianghu to draw an incomplete star map here. Since it was a benefit that everyone had, Lu Yi naturally had to go back and get one from Little 9. What should be popularized had been popularized with Lu Yi, and there was nothing else to remind him. Since he had already set foot in the constellation realm, then entering the starry sky was an inevitable choice. No one would stay in the 9 states and be conservative. Jianghu suddenly remembered something. That's right, there's one more thing I want to tell you. Senior, please speak. Lu Yi's expression turned serious. It's a matter of how you address me. Address me? Lu Yi was puzzled. What's the problem with addressing me? After discussing with us old fellows, we unanimously decided that after the cultivators of the 9 states advance to the constellation realm, they will all be treated as peers. You also know that the lifespan of cultivators of the 9 states is much longer than that of mortals. In the past, the upper limit of the cultivators of the 9 states was the divine sea, so the matters of seniority were not messy. However, now that they can advance to the constellation realm, there is still Yu Yao and Sunshine. Let's not talk about others, just you, Lu Yi, will definitely advance to the Sunshine realm in the future. At that time, perhaps we old fellows will still be wasting our time in the constellation realm. We can't expect you to address us as seniors, right? Now there is you, Lu Yi. Perhaps in the future, there will be Lu Yi. Lu Yi did not feel that there was a problem. Since you are a senior, you will always be a senior. Jianghu waved his hand. That's true, but if that's the case, we old fellows can't bear it. Therefore, after some discussion, everyone felt that since the 9 states now has a new future, there should be a new atmosphere. With the constellation realm as the boundary, under the constellation realm, the seniority will be the same. Above the constellation realm, we will interact with each other as peers. Compared to the long lifespan of cultivators, even if we old fellows are at least a few hundred years older than you, it's not a big deal to address you as senior martial brother. I reckon that in those top realms, there are many cultivators who are thousands of years older than you who call you senior martial brother. Lu Yi vaguely sensed the pride of these old fellows. On one hand, they hoped that the latecomers would surpass them in cultivation. On the other hand, they were afraid that there would be a scene where someone with a higher cultivation than them would address them as senior. How awkward would that be? Thus, they decided to set the tone. Lu Yi pondered for a moment, then followed the advice and cupped his fists. Senior Marshal Brother Guhong. Jian Guhong laughed and returned the greeting. Junior Marshal Brother Yi. However, Lu Yi quickly realized a problem. My sect master is also a constellation realm, Jian Guhong teased. When you see him later, you can try calling him Senior Marshal Brother. Lu Yi was not that stupid. If they were not from the same sect, it was fine to address each other as Senior Marshal Brother. However, since they were from the same sect, it was natural that it would be strictly based on seniority. Alright, I've said all that needs to be said. Go back and prepare. When it's about time, we will depart. Jian Guhong waved his hand. After you become a constellation realm, you will realize that the 9 states is just a small place. Lu Yi was not in a hurry to leave. Instead, he took out a ring. Senior Marshal Brother, please accept this. Jian Guhong took it and asked suspiciously, what is this? Senior Marshal Brother, you will know when you see it. The things inside can be considered as something shared by the Guardian Hall. Saying so, he turned around and left the hall, rushing into the sky. After he left, Jian Guhong checked the ring in his hand and quickly understood what it was. It was a storage tool, similar to a storage bag. However, the storage space inside was undoubtedly more stable and larger. Chapter 1292. This was something that did not exist in the 9 provinces. The storage items of the 9 provinces were storage bags because they were very simple to make. One only needed to take the skin of a certain type of demonic beast to refine them, and those demonic beasts could be reared in captivity. Therefore, even spirit stream stage cultivators would have several storage bags on them. A storage ring like the one on Jian Guhong's hand had never appeared in the 9 provinces era. As for where Lu Yi had obtained it, Jian Guhong didn't need to think with his toes to know that behind this storage ring was a human life. Moreover, it was the life of a top monster from another domain. Jian Guhong was shocked when he checked the contents of the ring. The ring was filled to the brim with spirit jades. With a sweep of his divine sense, he roughly estimated that there were around 15,000 pieces. Jian Guhong had never seen so many spiritual jades before. When he was collecting spiritual jades in space, his harvest was not small, but it was only a few hundred pieces. 15,000 pieces, if he were to search in space, it would take him at least a few years to collect this much. He was shocked by Lu Ye's wealth, but he also knew that this was Lu Ye's harvest in the Alpha Origin stage. Feeling grateful, he immediately sent a message to Lu Yi. On behalf of the future guardians, Senior Brother thanks Junior Brother for this generous gift. Lu Yi made it very clear that these spirit jades were shared by all guardians. In other words, whoever was responsible for guarding this place had the right to use these spirit jades for cultivation. The first guardian of the 9 states was Jian Guhong. In order to guard the 9 states, he voluntarily gave up the right to explore the stars and gather cultivation resources. At the current time, making such a decision required a high level of self-awareness, because guarding the 9 states meant that he had no cultivation resources to obtain. He could only wait for the next guardian to replace him before he could leave. Since Jian Guhong had such self-awareness, Lu Yi naturally would not keep it for himself. In the Alpha Origin stage, he had mined nearly 30,000 pieces of spirit jades with the help of the jade-eating ants, so he simply took out half of it. In this way, Jian Guhong's cultivation would not fall behind while he guarded the 9 provinces. If someone replaced Jian Guhong in the future, they could also use the spirit jades to cultivate. Of course, Lu Yi did not know how long the 15,000 pieces of spirit jades would last, but as long as there was a good start, there would definitely be others who would follow. Perhaps in the future, there would be a new situation where the protectors of the 9 prefectures could receive a monthly salary. This was very good. The guardian didn't force him. Since he was willing, he should get some benefits. After returning to Emerald Bamboo Peak, Lu Yi first familiarized herself with the various changes after advancing into a constellation. Only then did she take out a piece of supreme-grade spirit stone and put it in her mouth before crushing it with a crunch. He wanted to know if spirit stones would still be useful after he advanced to a constellation mansion. After trying it out, he found that the spirit stones were still useful, but compared to before, the effect was almost negligible. This was because the energy refined from the spirit stones could not increase the vitality of his flesh and blood. If this was the case for top-grade spirit stones, there was no need to even mention other spirit stones. Lu Yi took out a bottle of ordinary cloud spirit pills and poured them into his mouth. A moment later, he came to the same conclusion. The cloud spirit pill was of no use to the cultivation of the constellation realm. Ordinary cloud spirit pills wouldn't work. What about those refined from a pill furnace? With this thought in mind, Lu Yi took out another cloud spirit pill from a pill gourd and found that it was the same. Although it was produced from a pill gourd, it was still a cloud spirit pill after all. Its essence did not change, but the cloud spirit pill refined from a pill gourd did not have any impurities. It was easier for cultivators to absorb and refine, and there were no side effects. Immediately after, Lu Yi took out another spirit pill. This was also a type of spirit pill used for cultivation. Lu Yi didn't know how to name it. It was also produced from a pill gourd, but it was refined from precious herbs of the Alpha origin realm. Lu Yi didn't have many of these spirit pills. Previously, he had produced 9 in one furnace and tried one on the spot. Now there were only 8 left. After swallowing them whole, he activated the gluttony meal and quickly noticed the difference. This spirit pill was useful for cultivation. He could clearly feel the subtle changes in his flesh and blood, which meant that the essence of his flesh and blood had increased. Although he had tested an effective cultivation method, this method could not be popularized. This was because Lu Yi didn't know what herbs he had thrown into the pill gourd when he tried it. Therefore, even he couldn't refine the same type of spirit pill unless he kept trying. While feeling a little regretful, Lu Yi took out a golden spirit pill and crushed it. The golden vortex spun in front of him, and the roots of the talent tree reached in. After a while, Lu Yi frowned. The cultivation method of thieving heaven's secret was not of much use to him. He sighed softly. No wonder the stage of the constellation realm was in the starry sky. The things in the domain, whether it was spirit stones, spirit pills, or world spirit chi, had too little effect on the improvement of the constellation realm and could be ignored. This undoubtedly forced the constellation realm experts to go deep into the starry sky. Of course, this was also related to the fact that the 9 provinces had just been promoted to a large domain. Perhaps in the future, some higher quality herbs would be born in the 9 provinces. Although they couldn't be compared to the products of the Alpha origin realm, they could at least be refined into spirit pills that the constellation realm experts could benefit from. The herbs produced in the 9 provinces didn't have this effect. After various experiments, Lu Yi took out 2 spirit jades. He wanted to test the effect of the cultivation resources unique to the constellation realm. He sat cross-legged without moving and guarded his mind. As he activated his spirit chi, he refined the energy inside the spirit jade in his hand. Immediately, he felt 2 streams of heat flow into his body through his palm and began to nourish his flesh and blood. The effect was very obvious. Of course, this was also attributed to the change in Lu Ye's cultivation aptitude. When he first started cultivating, he couldn't cultivate with spirit stones in his hand. It was just like how he couldn't absorb world spirit chi in the beginning because his aptitude was not good enough. However, after receiving the gift of the soaring dragon realm's origin, he had been reborn. His 1-leaf aptitude had become 64 leaves. The ordinary cultivation methods of ordinary cultivators could also be used by him, and they were even more effective. After meditating for half a day and comparing the flow of energy in the spirit jades, he made a rough estimate. These 2 spirit jades could actually satisfy him for a full 3 days of cultivation. If it were someone else, they might be able to last for about 4 days. This meant that cultivators who had just entered the constellation realm would only need less than 20 spirit jades in a month even if they cultivated continuously. This consumption was so low. Based on this consumption, as long as the constellation realm cultivators weren't too unlucky, they should be able to satisfy their cultivation needs when searching for spirit jades in the starry sky. Of course, this was also related to Lu Ye's recent ascension to the constellation realm. As his cultivation base improved in the future, the efficiency of refining the spirit jade's energy would definitely increase. Normally, cultivators wouldn't cultivate in the starry sky. This was because most people needed a stable and undisturbed environment to cultivate. The starry sky was not suitable for cultivation. Usually, they would find a sufficient number of spirit jades and return to their native realm or find a peaceful environment. At most, they would only replenish their energy when they were exhausted. Lu Yi did not need a stable and comfortable environment. When he cultivated, he had always been multitasking. What he was trying now was the most orthodox and the most popular way of cultivation. However, he had never used this method to cultivate. He had his own unique cultivation method. The talent tree's power was activated. Invisible roots spread out and pierced into the 2 spirit jades in his hand, quickly absorbing them. The feeling was different again. He could clearly feel the energy in the spirit jades rapidly entering his body and settling into his strength. The efficiency of cultivating with the help of the talent tree had always been extremely high. Of course, the consumption was also high. Under such a normal cultivation method, the 2 spirit jades could last for 3 days. However, once the talent tree was activated, not to mention 3 days, it could not even last for 2 hours. However, Lu Yi quickly realized that something was wrong. Perhaps it was because he had just ascended to the constellation realm. Under such a crazy absorption, although the cultivation efficiency became extremely high, there was no time to refine the spirit jade's energy that entered his body. As a result, a lot of spirit jade's energy was absorbed into his body and dissipated before it could settle down. It was an unnecessary waste. Lu Yi tried to control the speed of the talent tree's absorption. After some testing, he determined a relatively reasonable absorption efficiency. This way, he could perfectly refine the energy in the spirit jades and achieve the highest cultivation efficiency. The 2 spirit jades could last for about half a day. In other words, even if he cultivated without sleep and rest, he would only consume about 120 spirit jades in a month's time. He still had 15,000 spirit jades left, which was enough for him to cultivate for 4 to 5 months. In fact, he should be able to last longer because he could not cultivate continuously. Therefore, even if he gave away half of the spirit jades, he did not have to worry about his cultivation resources in the short term. After confirming a reasonable cultivation method, Lu Yi could not help but want to try another method. He pinched a spirit jade in his hand, put it into his mouth, and bit down hard. Crunch. Spirit jades were condensed from the mysterious energy in the starry sky. In essence, they were not much stronger than spirit stones. Any cultivator at any level could crush them with just a little strength. Not to mention Lu Ye's current teeth. After chewing slightly, he swallowed it whole. Lu Yi immersed himself in feeling. There was a burning sensation in his abdomen, which was not a big problem. However, the energy contained in the spirit jades had all erupted in a short period of time. Even if Lu Yi tried his best to refine them, he could not stop most of the energy from flowing away. Under his inner vision, the talent tree was also burning with gray fog. It was obvious that the harmful things in the spirit jades had been burned. In terms of movement, it was bigger than when he was eating spirit stones. This meant that the cultivation method of eating spirit jades consumed more fuel for the talent tree. Chapter 1293. In just 1 incense stick's worth of time, the strange burning sensation in his abdomen disappeared and the energy contained in the spirit jade was exhausted. Lu Yi revealed a contemplative expression. After various tests, he could confirm one thing. Currently, it was not suitable for him to directly swallow spirit jades. He could only rely on the talent tree to increase his cultivation efficiency to a limited extent. Of course, even if it was limited, it was still 10 times more efficient than normal cultivators. This undoubtedly meant that as long as he had sufficient resources, he could grow even faster. The talent tree had never disappointed anyone before. This was good. When his cultivation base gradually improved, he could continue to adjust his cultivation efficiency. One day, he would be able to consume spirit jades like he did spirit stones without worrying about wasting the energy of the spirit jades. However, when that day came, Lu Yi estimated that his cultivation would have reached the moon jade realm. That should be a long time in the future. Xiao Jiao. Lu Yi softly called. This time, Xiao Jiao did not appear. Only a voice came, "What is it?" Tianji Pillar. Jianghu had reminded him that every cultivator who ascended to a constellation could obtain a Tianji Pillar before leaving the 9 provinces. It could be used to communicate with the 9 provinces in the starry sky. Xiaojie did not mention this and Lu Yi did not know. However, since he was going to leave, he naturally had to take one with him. The space in front of him slightly distorted and a small Tianji pillar appeared out of thin air. Lu Yi reached out and grabbed it. Xiaojie's voice came, "Keep it close to your body. Do not put it in your storage bag or storage ring. When you use it, just inject your spirit energy into it. However, the further it is, the weaker the connection with the 9 provinces. Be careful." Got it. Lu Yi rummaged through his storage ring and found a rope. It was not an ordinary rope. He did not know what material it was made of. It was quite sturdy and he did not know when he had obtained it. He tied the Tianji pillar to his neck and hid it in his clothes. He stood up and walked out of the bamboo house. His divine sense swept out and found Shui Yuan's position. He sent a message and soared into the sky. He had already tried what he needed to try and said goodbye. Everything was ready. It was time to see the wonders of the starry sky. His body continued to grow taller. 3,000 feet, 10,000 feet, 100,000 feet. Soon, he reached a height he had never reached before. When he was at the Spirit Sea realm, Lu Yi once tried to fly up like this out of boredom. He wanted to see if he could fly out of the 9 provinces. He was not the only one who had done this. In fact, 9 out of 10 warriors in the Spirit Sea realm had done this stupid thing. After all, everyone was curious about the starry sky. However, without exception, they all flew to a certain height and could not fly any higher. There seemed to be an invisible barrier in the sky above the 9 states, cutting off all paths of ascension. Lu Yi speculated that it was not some invisible barrier, but the limit of the divine sea realm. Before obtaining the power to connect with the starry sky, cultivators in the Spirit Sea realm could only be regarded as cultivators in the bounded domain. They could not get rid of the fetters of the bounded domain. Of course, teleporting with the help of the 9 prefectures pillar of heavenly secrets was an exception. However, even if they were teleported, they would only be teleported to another realm. Only when they reached the constellation realm and had the ability to cross the starry sky with their physical body would they have the ability to rush out of the bounded domain. Originally, it was a cloudy day in Ao Mountain. Dark clouds covered the sky. However, when Lu Yi flew to this height, the light of the sun suddenly spread out. Looking down, the sea of clouds rolled. It was a magnificent scene. The light of the sun painted the edges of the clouds with a layer of gold. It was a magnificent scene. As he continued to ascend, the outline of the 9 provinces began to appear in his vision. The higher he flew, the clearer the overall scene of the 9 provinces became. In fact, it was not the first time Lu Yi had observed the 9 provinces from this perspective. He had experienced this several times before. The first time was when he returned to the 9 provinces from the blood-refining realm. However, that time was probably just a look in his mind and not with his eyes, so it was not as shocking as it was now. The second time was when Yang Qing took him directly from the Spirit Stream battlefield to the 9 provinces. That time, it was a hurried trip and he did not see much. This time, it was different. This time, he truly relied on his own ability to fly out of the 9 provinces. Standing in the starry sky, he looked at his homeland. The entire 9 provinces was a round sphere. The layer of air around the sphere reflected the light of the sun. It was gorgeous and colorful. The surface of the sphere was blue. Lu Yi suspected that it was the sea. Any cultivator who had just entered the starry sky would be mesmerized by such a scene. Near the celestial bodies of the 9 regions, there was a floating blood-refining realm. Its appearance did not seem to have changed. It looked like a female creature whose head and limbs had been cut off. It looked like a huge corpse lying on the side of the 9 regions. Comparing the 2 celestial bodies, the 9 provinces was undoubtedly much more beautiful. There were also floating continents of various sizes that surrounded the 9 provinces. They showed a very rhythmic rotation. Those were the Spirit Stream battlefield, the Cloud River battlefield, and many other secret realms. Since the 9 provinces moved here and settled down, Little Nine's intelligence was born. Like a garbage collector, it picked up the broken celestial bodies and floating continents that drifted near the 9 provinces. It was this garbage that became the active stage for the cultivators of the 9 provinces today. It also allowed the cultivators to obtain many benefits. In fact, if one really calculated it this way, Little Nine played an indelible role in the recovery of the 9 provinces. Not only in the past, but also in the future. The fact that the 9 provinces could become a large domain that could rapidly grow was all thanks to Little Nine. In the previous 9 provinces era, a huge amount of manpower, material, and energy was spent to refine the Heaven's Fate Plate. In the end, it still preserved the legacy of this domain. It was hard to imagine how powerful the enemies of the previous 9 provinces era were, forcing those experts to make the decision to move their homeland. But this was not something Lu Yi could worry about. The previous 9 provinces era had passed. Now, it was the later 9 provinces era, the era of the constellation realm cultivators. When he went out, as long as he was careful and did not expose his origin in the 9 provinces, he probably would not provoke those old enemies. After all, who would have the time to investigate the background of a strange cultivator? Taking out the star map and comparing it, Lu Yi found that his direction was wrong. In the Guardian Palace of the Tian Continent Spirit Peak, Lu Yi told Jianghu the direction he wanted to explore. But at this moment, his position was not in the radiation range of this direction, but on the other side. This was a lack of experience. If he really had a lot of experience, Lu Yi would have used the Heaven's Fate Pillar to teleport to the corresponding position and then rushed into the starry sky. Fortunately, it did not matter too much. This trip was to familiarize Lu Yi with the starry sky, so there was no harm in running more. Immediately, he urged his spiritual power and flew in that direction. Soon, Lu Yi found that flying in the starry sky was different from flying in the domain. Flying in the domain, one could feel resistance. That was the resistance of the wind. The faster one flew, the greater the resistance. Therefore, the higher one's cultivation, the faster one could fly. This was because one could urge more profound spiritual power to resist the oncoming resistance. But in the starry sky, there was no resistance at all. Lu Yi only needed to spend a little spiritual power to obtain a very good flying speed. After obtaining such a speed, even if he did not urge his spiritual power, he could still maintain this speed. With a thought, didn't this mean that if he constantly urged his spiritual power, he could achieve almost unlimited speed? What kind of scene would that be? Out of curiosity, Lu Yi immediately tried to increase his speed. Facts proved that he was right. Under the effect of spiritual power, his speed almost showed an explosive growth, getting faster and faster. There was no sound of wind, only the feeling of lightning. Moreover, he was in the starry sky, and there were no particularly obvious references around him. Therefore, even though Lu Yi knew that his speed was already very fast, his perception still didn't feel anything. It was not until a huge meteorite suddenly appeared in front of him that Lu Yi suddenly realized that something was wrong. He wanted to change his direction, but because his speed was too fast, he could not change it in time. In the end, he dangerously brushed against the edge of the meteorite. Without a sound, the meteorite split into many pieces and flew off in different directions. Lu Yi also flew off in another direction like a kite with a broken string. After stabilizing his body with great difficulty, Lu Yi grimaced. Even if his physical body was strong, even if it was just a slight brush, under the ridiculously high speed, this collision almost caused him to suffer serious injuries. Moving his body slightly, he only felt an incomparable pain where he had brushed against the meteorite. His 5 viscera and 6 bowels seemed to have been displaced, and he also felt a little dizzy. Only then did Lu Yi know that flying in the starry sky, in theory, could indeed achieve almost unlimited speed, but the premise was that there should be no obstacles along the way. The starry sky was indeed vast and empty, but in reality, there were drifting meteorites everywhere. Some of these things were large enough to be easily discovered, while others were small and lifeless, so even a cultivator's divine sense could easily ignore them. Once there was an obstruction, when one's speed exceeded the limit of a cultivator's control, A collision was bound to occur, and such a collision was undoubtedly fatal. He was lucky this time and only suffered some minor injuries. If his speed had doubled, Lu Yi estimated that he would have been smashed into a meat patty. He was secretly afraid. It seemed that when flying in the starry sky in the future, he would have to control his speed. At the very least, it had to be within his control. Otherwise, he might not even know how he died. This was a very valuable experience. He had to send a message to Jianghu and have him record it as a warning to future generations. Thinking so, Lu Yi sent a message. A moment later, Jianghu replied, "I already know." Lu Yi was stunned. "Since senior apprentice brother knows, why didn't you tell me?" Jianghu replied, "Even if I told you, would you not try?" Chapter 1294. Lu Yi was speechless. Thinking about it carefully, it did seem to be the case. Even if someone had told him in advance, he would have tried it himself. It wasn't that he didn't want to listen to his elders, but that all cultivators who had just entered the cosmos were curious. Jianghu continued, "There are some things that can only be remembered deeply after experiencing them personally. Senior martial brother, have you experienced them before?" Jianghu didn't reply. Lu Yi snickered. He was certain that Jianghu wasn't the only one who had suffered. There were probably many others who had suffered the same thing. However, everyone kept it a secret. These old fellows weren't good people either. Standing quietly in the cosmos, a feeling of insignificance that he had never felt before lingered in his heart. In this vast and deep place, a constellation realm cultivator was as insignificant as a speck of dust. Even if he advanced to Yu Yao or Sunshine in the future, there probably wouldn't be much of a difference. After experiencing the initial novelty and suffering a small loss, Lu Yi finally calmed down. While recovering, he tried to absorb the mysterious energy in the cosmos. This was also a cultivation method. It was similar to how cultivators below the constellation realm would absorb the world's spiritual qi in a realm. However, the world's spiritual qi in a realm was the world's spiritual qi, while the world's spiritual qi outside the realm was an indescribable cosmic energy. This kind of cosmic energy was extremely corrosive to cultivators below the constellation realm. If one's cultivation base wasn't high enough, their flesh would wither away and they would die. Only constellation realm cultivators could ignore this corrosion and refine it for their own use. Cosmic energy filled every corner of the cosmos. When it condensed to a certain extent, it would condense into cultivation resources like spirit jades and spirit crystals. Theoretically speaking, even if constellation realm cultivators didn't have spirit jades and spirit crystals, as long as they were in the cosmos, they could cultivate at any time. Of course, this was only in theory. In reality, no one would cultivate in this way. This was because although the energy in the cosmos was omnipresent, it was too thin. It was so thin that it wasn't very efficient to cultivate. Lu Yi tried it and found that this was indeed the case. With his current talent of 64 leaves, he didn't feel much from absorbing the energy in the cosmos, let alone others. Even if they used the power of their talent tree, they wouldn't gain much benefit. This was because the cultivation environment wasn't good. This wasn't something that could be changed by changing cultivation methods. Of course, there must be some places in the starry sky with rich energy. Those were definitely wonderful places for cultivation. It all depended on whether the cultivators had the chance to find them. After recovering for a while, the aftereffects of colliding with the meteorites slowly disappeared. At this moment, Lu Yi had arrived at the correct location. The 9 states were beneath his feet. He only needed to fly above his head to explore the empty areas on the star chart. This was also one of his goals, or rather, one of his missions. This was the first time Lu Yi had set foot in the starry skies, so he did not plan to travel too far. He had set a limit of half a year's journey for himself. In that case, a single round trip would take a year. But in reality, it would definitely take a longer time because the area he wanted to explore was not a simple fan-shaped area, but a 3-dimensional fan-shaped space. It was very vast. One trip back and forth would definitely not be enough. Even 8 or 10 trips wouldn't be enough. With his strength alone, It would take at least a few decades to explore such a three-dimensional fan-shaped area. Fortunately, in the future, there would be an endless number of constellation realm cultivators in the 9 states. This kind of thing would not be done by him alone. Everyone was doing it, so the efficiency would increase a lot. After determining the direction, he urged his spiritual power, controlled his speed, and flew forward. As a rookie who had just entered the starry sky, the first thing he had to do was naturally to accumulate all kinds of experience in the starry sky. These experiences could not be taught by others, but needed to be carefully experienced by himself. Only by accumulating enough experience could he roam the starry sky in the future and deal with all kinds of unexpected situations. Lu Yi was also trying to find spiritual jades. The outer space of the 9 states had always been unexplored, so there would naturally be a lot of spiritual jades left. This was the advantage of a newly advanced large domain. Unlike those old large domains or top domains, where there were endless powerhouses, as long as spiritual jades and spiritual crystals appeared in the outer space of the domain, they would have long been plundered by the ancestors. It was very difficult to gain much. Finding spiritual jades was not difficult, because formed spiritual jades would give off a kind of strange energy fluctuation. Cultivators only needed to use their divine sense to monitor the surroundings. After sensing this kind of energy fluctuation, they could usually find it by following the direction. Lu Ye's luck was not bad. After flying for less than 2 hours, he felt the unique energy fluctuation of this kind of spiritual jades. Lu Yi followed the source of the fluctuations and saw a meteorite flying at high speed. The meteorite was much faster than Lu Ye's normal flying speed. When Lu Yi saw it, it was already far away. Lu Yi didn't know how far it had flown. Lu Yi hurriedly increased his speed and chased after the meteorite. His speed gradually exceeded the limit of his control, but because he was following behind the meteorite, Lu Yi was not worried about crashing into anything. Because even if there really was an obstruction in front of him, the meteorite would still be knocked away. He kept increasing his speed, closing the distance between them, and finally landed on the meteorite. After searching around, he found 2 sparkling purple objects on the meteorite. It was the color of spiritual jades. Although it was only 2 pieces of spirit jade, it was still a good start. Moreover, this was also Lu Ye's first harvest in the starry sky. The spirit jade mine that the reincarnation tree had mined in the alpha origin stage did not count, as it was just an opportunity. Lu Yi happily stepped forward and put away the 2 spiritual jades. He then carefully checked the other parts of the meteor. After finding nothing else, Lu Yi finally left. After some tossing and turning, he had already deviated from his direction. Lu Yi turned his head and looked at the position of the Sun Star and Venus Star, then tried to locate the direction of the 9 provinces. He found that it was not difficult and easily found the position of the 9 provinces. Only then did he relax. He continued to search for spiritual jades while recording some of the celestial bodies he saw. These things would be sent back to the 9 provinces and told to Jianghu so that he could complete the star map. He did not neglect the matter of cultivation. No matter what he was doing, Lu Yi held a spiritual jade in each hand, urging the power of the talent tree to absorb the spiritual jades. The efficiency was also controlled within the range that he could convert. In this regard, he was much better than the other constellations. If the other constellations wanted to cultivate, they had to find a suitable place to cultivate and calmly refine the energy of the spiritual jades. Basically, they could not do anything else. However, Lu Yi slowly discovered a problem that he had considered before. It was far more difficult to improve in the constellation realm than in the constellation realm. Although there were only 3 levels in the constellation realm, each level was much more difficult than the previous one. Lu Yi continued to explore and cultivate at the same time. His spirit jades continued to be consumed, and he could feel that the essence of his flesh and blood was improving. However, this improvement was like a bottomless pit that could never be filled. He had no idea when he would be able to cross this level and reach the level of viscera essence. The constellation stage was a watershed. After a cultivator stepped into the constellation stage, it was like entering another world of cultivation. Lu Yi also discovered that the location of the 9 prefectures could indeed be considered a remote and desolate place. This was because he had not encountered a single living creature in the starry sky for 3 months. In the vast starry sky, it was as if he was the only living creature. The silent silence made one feel lonely and oppressed. Cultivators with insufficient mental fortitude would likely go crazy if they stayed in such an environment for a long time. Lu Yi was able to endure this loneliness. To be honest, ever since he started cultivating, he had been moving alone most of the time. He had long trained his mental fortitude to endure this loneliness. He had no idea how many miles he had flown in 3 months. At the beginning, Lu Yi could still vaguely see the outline of the 9 prefectures when he looked back, but today he could no longer see the 9 prefectures. He did not panic and continued to explore according to the established plan. This was also his responsibility as a constellation of the 9 prefectures. He had obtained some spiritual jades. Although it paled in comparison to the amount he had mined in the alpha origin stage, it was enough to meet his daily cultivation needs. There was even a surplus. On this day, Lu Yi followed the fluctuations of spiritual jades and came to a long meteorite belt. Such meteorite belts were very common in the starry sky. Lu Yi had seen them several times before. They were all composed of meteorites of various sizes. It was unknown where they came from or where they were going. Before Lu Yi discovered them, they must have been drifting for countless years. After several months of tempering, although Lu Yi's experience in the starry sky could not be considered rich, it was at least much better than when he had just started. In particular, he had accumulated some experience in searching for spiritual jades. It was very easy for such meteorite belts to produce spiritual jades. Moreover, once discovered, there would be more than one piece. Lu Yi had previously obtained a considerable harvest from one such meteorite belt. Today, he had encountered another one. Moreover, the energy fluctuations were very chaotic and seemed to be even richer than the previous one. Lu Yi naturally would not miss this opportunity. The meteorite belt was very long, almost 10,000 miles from the beginning to the end. However, such a length was nothing in the starry sky. According to his experience, Lu Yi followed the end of the meteorite belt as usual. There was one advantage to entering from this direction, and that was that he didn't have to worry about being hit by the chaotic meteorites. He just had to control his speed. Moreover, searching from the end to the front would ensure that he did not miss anything. Using the rapidly flying meteorites as a springboard, Lu Yi traveled 10 miles before landing on a meteorite. 2 specks of purple light entered his vision. He had been doing this for several months and no longer felt the novelty of collecting spiritual jades. Lu Yi quickly stepped forward and reached out to grab one of the spiritual jades. He was a little curious. The purple light of the spiritual jades seemed to be brighter than normal. Chapter 1295. Lu Yi did not pay too much attention to it. Although spiritual jades were not categorized into low, medium, and high grades like spirit stones, there were still differences in quality. However, the difference was not huge. Generally speaking, a spiritual jade of a higher quality would have a darker color. Therefore, it was not a big deal even if the 2 spiritual jades in front of him were slightly brighter. However, when he grabbed the spiritual jade, he suddenly realized that something was wrong because the feeling in his hand was different from normal. Not only that, but a great sense of crisis suddenly lingered in his heart. In front of his vision, the space in front of him was distorted, and a bloody mouth full of sharp fangs suddenly opened in a position that was originally empty. It was about to bite him. Lu Yi instinctively wanted to withdraw, but there was a strange suction force coming from the giant mouth, making it impossible for him to retreat for a while. Seeing that the huge mouth with sharp fangs was about to close, Lu Yi slammed his body forward and crashed into the huge mouth the moment the fangs fell. On the meteorite, the distortion in space calmed down, and a figure that was a few meters tall suddenly appeared. It was a strange creature with a round body that was covered in sharp thorns. It did not have a tail and looked like a round ball. There were 2 long tentacle-like things on its forehead, and at the top of the tentacles hung 2 flesh sacs that emitted a purple light. The two flesh sacs were no different from spiritual jades in terms of color, shape, and surface texture. The spiritual jades that Lu Yi saw before were the disguise of the two flesh sacs. However, when the strange creature revealed its true form, the flesh sacs were exposed. At this moment, not only did they look like spiritual jades, but they also looked like two lanterns hanging on the creature's head. If someone who lived by the sea saw it, they would definitely recognize that it looked very similar to the anglerfish in the sea. However, while the anglerfish lived in the sea, this strange creature lived in the starry sky. The anglerfish swallowed Lu Yi in one gulp and blinked its eyes, revealing a slightly sly light. Before it could savor the food in its mouth, a sudden change occurred. A bright light suddenly bloomed from the gap between the anglerfish's fangs. At first glance, it looked like it had a bright lamp in its mouth. Then, the surface of the anglerfish's body also bloomed with lines of light, and a powerful and violent spiritual energy suddenly burst out. A lotus flower suddenly bloomed, and it was like a sun had exploded. The brilliance of its radiance caused an area of 500 kilometers to be as bright as day. There was no sound in the starry sky. The petals of the lotus flew in all directions, cutting through the void. The lotus slowly dissipated, and Lu Ye's shadow stood in the middle of the stamen. His eyes were slightly lowered, and the Pan Mountain saber in his hand was stained with blood. The entire body of the saber glowed with a faint glow. That was the blessing of the Divine Blade Spirit tattoo. Ever since he deduced this new spiritual inscription, Lu Yi had never used it against the enemy. The main reason was that he didn't have the opportunity to do so. He didn't expect that he would use it today. The effect was very good. Although it was still not as good as Green Luster's Zhu Yan, the difference was not big. When his attainments in the art of spiritual inscriptions increased in the future, he should be able to improve and optimize the Divine Blade Spirit tattoo. This was the spiritual inscription that could help him in the constellation realm. In comparison, the original Sharp Spirit tattoo was no longer of much use. This encounter was very unexpected. To be honest, before the sense of crisis suddenly came, Lu Yi didn't notice anything wrong. This was because this guy hid too well. The two spiritual jades distracted Lu Yi a little. In addition, he hadn't encountered any living creatures since he left the land of the 9 states, so he had indeed let his guard down. However, his reaction was also extremely fast. If he hadn't crashed into the beast's huge mouth, with its mouth full of fangs, Lu Yi reckoned that he would have lost an arm. At this moment, Lu Yi also knew what he had encountered. Star Beast! There were all kinds of demon beasts in the realm, and there were also demon beasts in the outer realm. However, demon beasts in the outer realm were not called demon beasts, but star beasts. There were all kinds of star beasts, each with their own unique abilities. Lu Yi had too little experience in the starry sky, and the information he came in contact with was also very limited. Naturally, he didn't know what this star beast was. He didn't even have the time to see the complete appearance of this star beast. However, in comparison, star beasts had their own unique advantages. That was, they were born with the ability to absorb and refine the energy of the starry sky. Therefore, they lived in the starry sky from the moment they were born. Spiritual jades and spiritual crystals were extremely important cultivation resources for cultivators, and they were also their favorite. Every star beast could devour spiritual jades and spiritual crystals to increase their strength. For example, Lu Yi had obtained the heart core of the void beast in the insect's tree realm. The void beast was a type of star beast, and a very powerful one at that. Because it was born with the ability to control the void, it was very difficult to kill even if one's strength surpassed it. This made the value of the heart core of the void beast all the more obvious. The insect race had obtained a piece of the heart core of the void beast through some unknown method and placed it in the insect's tree realm as a channel to connect to other tree realms. In the end, Lu Yi had destroyed them all. Such a loss could be said to be great. Lu Yi could sense that the astral beast he had just killed was at the constellation realm. This was because the moment the astral beast appeared, the fluctuation of spiritual energy was obvious. The suction force from its huge mouth should be its instinct, or perhaps its innate ability. Lu Yi was also at the constellation realm, but he had killed the star beast with one blow. This showed his own foundation. Even if he had just entered the constellation realm, his rich accumulation in the past was still fermenting. Of course, this also had to do with Lu Ye's environment. No matter how strong the defense of the star beast was, it was always relatively weak in the mouth. The third style of the domineering blade enhanced with the divine blade spirit tattoo was extremely powerful. However, Li did not feel any joy from killing a strong enemy. Instead, his scalp went numb. There was no other reason. In the perception of his divine telekinesis, powerful auras were rapidly recovering. In his field of vision, round star beasts with two lanterns hanging on their heads like anglerfish were flying toward him from all directions. There was not only one anglerfish in this meteorite belt, but a school of them. Lu Yi even felt the aura of the moon jade realm from them. In other words, there was a moon jade realm in this school of anglerfish. As they flew, they crashed into the meteorites. Although their speed was slightly reduced, it did not seem to be a big deal. Lu Yi immediately knew that these guys were the type with rough skin and thick flesh. He had fallen into a den of thieves. Lu Yi did not even think about it. He turned around and ran. As he activated his spiritual energy, he quickly increased his speed to the limit that he could control. Thanks to his accumulated experience, when he entered this meteorite belt previously, he had entered from the tail end and only went a dozen miles deep. At this time, it was not difficult to escape. If he had recklessly entered from the middle of the meteorite belt, he would have been attacked from both sides and would not be able to save himself. The sudden death of their comrade infuriated the anglerfish. They chased after Lu Yi relentlessly, but soon, the anglerfish with lower cultivation were left behind. Only the anglerfish with higher cultivation were biting onto Lu Yi like leeches. Lu Yi realized that his speed was not fast enough. This was because the distance between them was shrinking. The few anglerfish that were closest to him were already within 100 miles. In the bounded domain, this distance was considered relatively safe because the attack of a divine ocean realm cultivator could not reach this far. However, it was not enough in the starry sky. Lu Ye's skin immediately tensed up. He felt a needle-like pain, which was a sign of impending danger. He did not even think about it and immediately leaned to the side. Almost at the same time he moved, several purple rays of light pierced through his original position. Lu Yi immediately broke out in cold sweat. Although he did not know what these purple rays of light were, he guessed that they must be an attack by the anglerfish. He could not block the attack of a few anglerfish from the moon jade realm. He hurriedly turned his head and saw that the two lanterns hanging on the heads of the anglerfish were emitting a bright purple light. Then they turned into rays of light and rushed toward him. Lu Yi moved freely in the starry sky, constantly dodging the attacks from behind. There were a few times when he dodged by the skin of his teeth. However, because of this, his escape speed slowed down. He could still speed up, but that would be beyond his control. If he bumped into something in front of him, the consequences would be unimaginable. Lu Yi did not know whether to laugh or cry. He did not expect that the first battle he encountered in the starry sky would be like this. He had only killed one of their companions, and yet they were chasing him so closely. This was really too much. In a moment of anger, Lu Yi turned back and raised his hand to release a ray of Imperial equipment. He did not attack the anglerfish that were chasing him because he knew that such an attack would not be of much use. The Imperial equipment was used for other purposes. However, he didn't expect that not long after the Imperial equipment left his hand, a purple ray of light would greet him and shatter the Imperial equipment. Lu Yi had no choice but to choose another direction. He released another ray of Imperial equipment. This time, he learned his lesson. He did not attack the anglerfish that were flying toward him. Instead, he attacked to the side. He continued to escape forward, constantly dodging the attacks of the purple rays of light behind him. After a while, his body suddenly swayed and disappeared on the spot. The anglerfish that were chasing him immediately fell into a state of confusion. They were also intelligent. In the past, when they were drifting in the starry sky with the meteorite belt, they had seen the methods of the cultivators of other races. However, this was the first time they had seen such a strange method. How could such a big living person just disappear into thin air? The anglerfish flew to the place where Lu Yi disappeared and looked around. Not only that, the lanterns hanging on their heads were constantly emitting purple rays of light in all directions. They seemed to think that Lu Yi must be hiding nearby and wanted to force him to show up. They did not know that Lu Yi had already appeared nearly 10,000 miles away. Chapter 1296. After advancing to the constellation realm, the range of the Void Spirit Rune's teleportation ability had also increased by leaps and bounds. Lu Yi remembered that when he was at the Divine Sea realm, he could only teleport up to a distance of about 3,000 miles. But now, he could teleport up to nearly 10,000 miles, which was almost 3 times the original range. He had just advanced to the constellation realm not long ago. What would happen when he reached the Moon Jade realm and Sunshine realm? Lu Yi didn't have time to think too much. He immediately condensed his sword cultivator clone, hurriedly put on a set of prepared clothes, and put on the sword gourd before rushing in a certain direction. The sword cultivator clone was originally wearing the Scarlet Dragon battle suit, which was a treasure. However, the Scarlet Dragon battle suit had been damaged during the Alpha Origin stage, and Lu Yi couldn't be bothered to repair it. Compared to the rapid increase in his strength, the Scarlet Dragon battle suit, which originally provided decent defensive capabilities, was no longer of much use. While the main body set off, the clone also rushed in another direction, which was where the meteorite belt was. The few Moonjade realm angler fish raged in the place where Lu Yi disappeared for a while, but they still couldn't find any trace of Lu Yi. Just as they were confused, intense spirit power fluctuations came from the distance behind them. Someone was fighting. A few Moonjade realm angler fish immediately felt that something was wrong and immediately turned back. They didn't fly far before they saw a scene that made their eyes pop out of their sockets. The human cultivators they were looking for had already run behind them at some point in time, and were in the midst of a massacre. There were many anglerfish chasing from the meteorite belt, but because of the difference in strength between them, after chasing for a while, those who were not strong enough were left behind. The weaker they were, the further they were left behind. Lu Yi really didn't want to provoke those Moonjade realm anglerfish. There was a limit to killing enemies above one's level. As a weapon cultivator who had just entered the constellation realm, Lu Yi was not arrogant enough to think that he could kill several Moonjade realm star beasts. But if he couldn't defeat the Moonjade realm, he could kill the constellation realm star beasts. These guys wandered in the starry sky along with the meteorites, using the 2 lanterns above their heads to disguise themselves as spirit jades. They had harmed countless cultivators and were obviously not good people. This time, if Lu Yi hadn't reacted in time, he would have lost at least one of his arms. But then again, this was their way of survival. Lu Yi didn't want to comment on it. He couldn't see through the anglerfish's disguise because his eyesight wasn't good enough. However, with so many anglerfish chasing after him, it was a little too much. This triggered Lu Ye's killing intent. It had been almost a year since Lu Yi had returned from the Alpha Origin stage. During this time, Lu Yi had not used a weapon except for the few corpse clan members he had killed on the Wushuang continent. For a weapon cultivator, such days were undoubtedly boring. Moreover, after ascending to the constellation realm, Lu Yi had yet to seriously examine his own strength. The main reason was that there wasn't a suitable opportunity. He couldn't possibly find those constellation realm cultivators in the 9 prefectures to spar with, right? Even if that was the case, he wouldn't be able to achieve anything by sparring with them. This group of star beasts was undoubtedly a very good target. The massacre began. Wherever the long saber went, there would be no one with a sharp edge. Although they were all at the constellation realm, cultivators undoubtedly had more means than star beasts. These anglerfish's attack methods were too limited. They mainly relied on the purple lines on the 2 flesh sacs on their heads to attack. They didn't know how to adapt, so it was easy to avoid them. Other than that, they would pounce and bite at close range. Their fangs and mouths looked scary, but it didn't help if they couldn't bite. Although they could still activate some magical abilities, such as the powerful suction force from their mouths, It wasn't difficult for Lu Yi to escape as long as he was vigilant. As the seemingly small figure moved, the saber slashed, and blood splattered everywhere. The divine edge spirit rune showed its power again. These star beasts were undoubtedly the type with thick skin and flesh. Ordinary constellation realm cultivators like Lu Yi couldn't break through their physical defenses even if they used all their strength. However, in front of the mountain pan saber enhanced with the divine edge spirit rune, their thick skin and flesh weren't enough. Although it wasn't enough to kill them with one slash, every slash was so deep that the bones could be seen. In addition to the soul-slashing saber's characteristics, once the star beasts were injured, their performance would become worse. They would often be killed by Lu Yi's saber. However, Lu Yi soon discovered a problem. The threat of the soul-slashing saber seemed to be much weaker against constellation realm cultivators. In the past, when he was at the divine ocean realm, any enemy's spirit that was injured by his saber would be greatly impacted at the same time, causing their spirit to hurt and their mental state to become unstable. However, looking at these star beasts' performance now, although it was still affected, it wasn't as bad as when he was at the divine ocean realm. Lu Yi understood that this wasn't because the soul-slashing saber's power had changed. The soul-slashing saber was still the soul-slashing saber, but the enemy's strength had increased, and they could withstand the impact of the soul-slashing saber more. Perhaps one day, when facing a stronger enemy, the soul-slashing saber might completely lose its effect. 10,000 miles wasn't a long distance in the starry sky, but when the Jade Realm star beasts flew to the battlefield a few months later, Lu Yi had already killed more than a dozen constellation realm star beasts. Sensing these threatening auras approaching, Lu Yi immediately retreated, his figure disappearing from sight. A few months later, the star beasts of the Jade Realm came to the rescue in anger. They even deliberately surrounded Lu Yi from several directions, with the intention of taking him down in one fell swoop. However, as soon as they arrived, the same ghostly scene appeared again. That abominable human cultivator had disappeared once again. Looking around, the battlefield was a mess. Broken limbs and corpses of star beasts were everywhere. The star beasts that were still alive all had wounds on them, and they looked very miserable. Their clan was very powerful. Although they didn't have any Sunshine Realm star beasts, there were several Moon Realm star beasts, nearly 30 Constellation Realm star beasts, and about 100 Constellation Realm star beasts. Even in the starry sky, such a force was extremely powerful. However, after a great battle, half of their Constellation Realm star beasts died. This made the star beasts of the Jade Realm feel so heartbroken that they were about to bleed. But soon, one of the Moon Realm star beasts let out a roar. In the starry sky, sound couldn't be transmitted, but the transmission of divine sense wasn't hindered. Therefore, this roar clearly reached the ears of all the star beasts. In the next instant, many of the star beasts that were still alive didn't even have time to check the battlefield. They hurriedly flew toward the asteroid belt. They also realized that something was wrong. That human cultivator had suddenly disappeared before coming here to kill half of their Constellation Realm cultivators. Now that he had disappeared a second time, where could he have gone? Their worries were soon realized. On the way, both the Moon Realm star beasts and the Constellation Realm star beasts felt intense spiritual power fluctuations in front of them. They also felt the rapid loss of vitality. The star beasts that chased after Lu Yi were all Constellation Realm star beasts. Those Constellation Realm star beasts were still hibernating in the asteroid belt. Star beasts were different from cultivators of other races. They were born in the starry sky, and their bodies were born to resist the corrosion of the starry sky's energy. On the other hand, the environment of the realm was very unsuitable for them. Therefore, regardless of whether the realm was big or small, there was no risk of being invaded by star beasts. This was because star beasts wouldn't rashly go to a certain realm. No matter how high or low that realm was, they were born in the starry sky and would die in the starry sky. The boundless starry sky was where they lived. When Lu Yi was escaping earlier, he noticed that there were many star beasts that weren't strong enough to stay in the asteroid belt. Now that he had returned to the asteroid belt with the help of his sword cultivator clone, he naturally wouldn't hold back. His original body and clone swept left and right. Saber light and sword light wreaked havoc like two flood dragons roaming the sea. Everywhere they passed, there was a rain of blood. Lu Ye's original body and his clone forcefully plowed through the asteroid belt that was 10,000 miles long. Countless asteroids were destroyed before they left. When the group of star beasts returned, Lu Ye was nowhere to be seen. Even if they wanted to chase after him, they didn't know where to go. The surviving star beasts appeared from all over the shattered asteroids and gathered around the Moon Jade Realm star beasts. Seeing the number of surviving star beasts, the Moon Jade Realm star beasts all glared at them with rage. Powerful spiritual senses interweaved in all directions, conveying their anger and sorrow. They had encountered cultivators of many races in the past, and they had even encountered cultivators from the Moon Jade Realm. However, compared to a large group like them, a single Moon Jade Realm cultivator wouldn't dare to provoke them. As for the Constellation Realm cultivators that had been lured here by the traps, most of them had become their food. They had never thought that they would encounter such a strange Constellation Realm cultivator today. He had single-handedly slaughtered their entire group. More than half of the Constellation Realm cultivators had died, and 70% of those below the Constellation Realm had died. In the end, they didn't even know where to look for revenge. This was also the fate of space wanderers. The Moon Jade Realm star beasts knew that they couldn't split up now. Otherwise, if they left, that human cultivator might jump out from somewhere. If they couldn't take revenge or split up, they didn't have many options left. Half a day later, the asteroid belt quieted down. The star beasts went into hibernation again. They drifted along the asteroid belt and quickly left this region. Tens of thousands of miles away, Lu Ye's original body waited for a while. He didn't find any traces of pursuers, so he knew that the star beasts hadn't chased after him. It seemed that his previous strategy had worked. When he was slaughtering the star beasts in the asteroid belt, he didn't kill them all. Instead, he deliberately left some of them behind. It wasn't good to kill them all. Once the Moon Jade Realm star beasts lost their restraints, they would probably pursue him relentlessly. He wasn't afraid of being chased by them since he was alone. However, he was only 3 months away from the 9 states. Although the chances of the star beasts finding the 9 states were low, it was better to be safe than sorry. It was better to be careful. You're tuning in to the Han Li's Immortal Journey YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.